All right, so get this. We're diving into a world where companies are financing robot workforces.
Yeah, robots. And get this, engineered organisms. Sounds like something straight out of science fiction, right? But it's the reality we're dealing with now.
And it's not just some far-off future either.
This landed on my desk this morning, a new report from the rate card. It's the go-to source for anything in the equipment financing world.
If you're a pro in equipment financing, that's where you get your information. So this is a big deal.
And the thing is, this isn't just about some abstract financial stuff. This impacts everyone, right?
Yeah.
It impacts your investments, the job market, you name it.
It really makes you think differently about work itself.
So let's unpack this a bit. Today, we're taking a deep dive into what they're calling post-human labor.
Which is a pretty loaded term when you think about it.
It is. So post-human labor, how does it shake up how companies are getting the money they need? Right, financing. Well, the article, it defines post-human labor as essentially machines and engineered organisms taking on the jobs that, well, humans have always done.
So we're not just talking about robots building cars in factories, are we?
No, not even close. Think about it. You've got surgical robots assisting with surgeries.
Wow.
Drones monitoring those massive farms. And then you've got, like, microbes.
Microbes?
Yeah, microbes that are actually engineered to, like, make the soil healthier so crops grow better.
It's wild to think that this is actually happening now. This isn't some sci-fi movie set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg, really.
I bet. The article, they projected that this whole robotics and automation thing, it could be a $100 billion market soon.
And that's not even factoring in the biological side of things.
$100 billion. That's a lot of robots. But I guess it makes sense. Companies are always looking to, be more efficient, do more with less.
Cheaper, faster, better. That's the name of the game.
Exactly. And these technologies, they kind of promise all of that, right? Lower costs, faster production. But I'm guessing none of this comes cheap.
You're absolutely right. The upfront costs for these technologies, they're significant, to say the least. And that's where equipment financing steps in.
Because it's always been a way for companies to get what they need now, even if they don't have all the cash up front.
Right. Right. It bridges the gap between what a business needs to grow and what their finances currently look like. And in this new world, that gap is getting wider.
Definitely. And we're not talking about small players here either. I mean, the article mentioned Tesla, Amazon. They're leading the charge when it comes to robotics.
And on the synthetic biology side, you got to watch out for Ginkgo Bioworks. They're doing some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, shaping the future. But even with those big names and big money coming in, the article hinted at some pretty big challenges when it comes to, well, actually financing this whole post-human labor revolution.
Yeah, they actually called it a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
For the entire industry. And for good reason.
Because the old ways of doing things just don't cut it anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The traditional financial models, the ones that work for, say, financing a fleet of trucks, they just don't translate well to the world of robots and, engineered bacteria.
Yeah, that makes sense. What kind of issues are we talking about specifically?
Well, the biggest one that the article highlighted is the upfront cost. Robots, especially the really advanced ones, they're not cheap. And for a lot of businesses, that's a huge barrier to entry.
Right. They want the tech, but they can't necessarily afford the tech.
Precisely. Then there's the whole issue of how quickly this tech becomes outdated.
Oh, right. That's a big one.
Imagine you lease a robot, say a 5-year lease, which is pretty standard. But in 2 years, there's a newer, faster, better model available. Suddenly, the robot you're leasing, it's obsolete.
It'd be like being stuck with a flip phone when everyone else has moved on to the latest smartphone, right? Your investment, it loses its value fast.
Exactly. And at least with a robot, you can maybe resell it or repurpose it. But then there's the whole other side of this, the engineered bacteria and all that. How do you even put a price tag on that?
Yeah, how do you value something that, it's alive? It's not like there's a Kelly Blue Book for engineered bacteria.
Exactly. And it's not just about valuing them, but also you have to think about the ethics of it all.
Right. All those ethical and regulatory hurdles. People get worried about genetically modified organisms, and rightfully so.
And the potential impact on the environment, the regulations.
Yeah.
It's a lot to consider.
So it's not just about the financial risks, but it's also about ethical risks. Environmental risks is a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely. It's this whole web of complexities that traditional finance just wasn't built to handle.
So if the old ways of doing things don't work, what are people doing? I can't imagine the finance world is just sitting back and letting this opportunity pass them by.
Oh, not at all. There's some really smart people working on this, and the article highlights some pretty innovative solutions. That's where things get really interesting.
So we're back, and it sounds like the finance world is getting creative to keep up with these robots and bio things. What's the latest?
Well, the article, it talks about this move towards something they call performance-based leasing.
Performance-based leasing, like paying for what the robot does instead of just owning it outright.
Yeah, exactly. It's like instead of paying for the robot itself, you're paying for how much it actually produces.
Makes sense. So less about owning the robot worker and more about, paying for the results, the actual work.
Right. It ties the cost directly to the output. And that makes a lot of sense because in this world, efficiency is everything. And honestly, it also helps deal with that whole obsolescence thing we were talking about.
Because if a new model comes out, your payments are based on the work being done, not the outdated robot.
Exactly. It's a whole new way of thinking about it.
It's clever. But what about with the biological assets? How do you measure the performance of, say, engineered bacteria?
It's a good question, and it's definitely more complex.
Are we giving microbes performance reviews now?
Well, not exactly, but the idea is you need to find a way to measure the output. So let's say you've got engineered bacteria that are being used to make biofuel, right?
Yeah, I'm following.
The payments, in that case, they could be tied to how much biofuel is actually produced. So the cost is directly linked to how well those bacteria are doing their job.
So the more biofuel they crank out, the more valuable they become. It's like a bonus structure, but for microbes.
It's an interesting way to think about it. And it encourages both the companies making this technology and the companies using it to really focus on efficiency.
I like it. Makes sense. What else are folks cooking up on the financing side?
Well, one of the biggest things the article talks about is this move towards, get this, as-a-service models.
As a service, like software as a service, but for robots and bacteria.
Yeah. We're talking Robotics-as-a-Service, they call it RaaS, and even Biology-as-a-Service, BaaS.
RaaS and BaaS, catchy. So instead of buying a whole bunch of robots, you could just subscribe to a RaaS provider and basically rent the robots when you need them.
Exactly. It's like, think of it like your Netflix subscription, but instead of movies, you're getting robots. Or bacteria.
Wild. And if your needs change, you just adjust your subscription.
Right. You need more robots this month. No problem. You need a different kind of robot next month. They've got you covered. And usually, maintenance and upgrades are all included, so companies don't have to worry about managing all that themselves.
That's pretty appealing. Less hassle.
Exactly.
Sounds almost too good to be true. What's the catch? I mean, there's got to be some downsides.
Well, of course, any new system has its own kinks to work out, right? And the article does point out that this is still pretty new territory. There are risks. Financiers are definitely trying to wrap their heads around all of this.
Right, because the rate card, they're not all sunshine and rainbows. They give it to you straight. So let's talk about those risks. What are we looking at here?
Well, one of the big ones, we've mentioned it already, is obsolescence. How do you put a value on something when the technology is changing so fast?
Right. Today's cutting-edge robot could be tomorrow's old news. So what are they doing about it? How do you even plan for that?
Well, the article, it talks about some different strategies. Shorter lease terms, for one.
Makes sense.
Built-in upgrade options, so you're not stuck with an outdated model. And even some contracts have clauses that say, if the technology doesn't hit a certain performance level, the payments can be adjusted.
Interesting. So it's all about flexibility, being able to adapt quickly.
Exactly. Because trying to predict exactly what's going to happen in this field is next to impossible. So you have to build that uncertainty into the financial models themselves.
Right. Build in the flexibility to change course when you need to. Okay, that's obsolescence. But what about, robots breaking down? Because robots break down, right? They're complicated machines.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where service agreements and performance guarantees become really important. And the article even mentioned some companies are looking into real-time monitoring systems.
Wait, real-time monitoring? You mean like sensors on the robot that can tell if something's going wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Like imagine a sensor that detects a slight change in performance or some weird behavior.
Kind of like a robot health tracker.
Right. And it automatically sends an alert to both the company using the robot and the finance company so they can address the issue before it becomes a major breakdown.
That's pretty cool. And I bet that data, it's not just useful for fixing problems, but also for, seeing how to improve performance or predict when maintenance is needed.
Exactly. It's all about using technology to, manage the risks of using technology.
It's pretty wild when you think about it, but I have to imagine things get even more complicated when we're talking about engineered organisms.
Right.
I mean, we're not just talking about nuts and bolts here. We're talking about living things.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting and, to be honest, a little bit uncomfortable. Because then you have to start thinking about ethics and the environment and, well, even what it means to own a living organism.
Okay, so we're moving beyond just finance now. We're getting into some big philosophical questions.
We are. But these are questions that need to be addressed because, as the rate card article points out, this isn't science fiction anymore. This is the world we're living in, and we have to figure out how to navigate it responsibly.
So we're back, and wow, it's clear this whole post-human labor thing, it's not just about the dollars and cents. It's really making us rethink the relationship between, well, humans and technology, right?
Absolutely. And the rate card article, it really dives into those bigger implications. Like we've talked about the efficiency and the potential of all this, but what about the people? What happens when robots and AI start replacing human workers on a large scale?
It's that classic fear, right? Machines taking over. But it feels a lot more real now, like this is happening, whether we're ready for it or not.
Yeah, it's a tough issue, and there's no simple answer. The article, it does point out that while some jobs will be lost, other jobs will be created, new industries even, that we can't even imagine right now.
So it's not just will robots take our jobs, but what kinds of jobs will there be in the future?
Right. It's about preparing for that shift, making sure people have the skills they need for this new world of work.
That makes sense. But it's bigger than just, job training, isn't it? It's about our whole safety net, how we support people who might be left behind.
Exactly. It's about making sure the transition is fair for everyone. And then, on top of all that, you've got the ethical considerations with, the synthetic biology side of things.
Right, because we're not just talking about robots building cars anymore. We're talking about literally engineering living organisms. And that comes with a whole other layer of questions.
It does. Like the article, it talks about the potential impact on the environment.
Yeah.
What happens if these engineered organisms, what if they get out of control?
It's like something out of a movie.
It is. And we need to be thinking about those risks now while we still have time. We need safeguards, regulations, the whole 9 yards.
And then there's the whole philosophical side of this, What does it even mean to engineer life? Where do we draw the line?
It's a big question. And it's not just scientists who need to be grappling with this, but investors, policymakers, really all of us.
It really makes you realize that financing the future, it's not just about picking the next big tech winner. It's about shaping the kind of future we actually want to live in.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of responsible innovation comes in.
Responsible innovation.
Yeah.
So not just innovating for the sake of it, but thinking about the consequences.
Right. Thinking about the impact on society, on the environment, on all of us.
It's not just about making as much money as possible, but making sure everyone benefits.
And the good news is, it seems like that message is starting to get through. The article, it talks about how investors are looking at more than just the financial bottom line now. They're thinking about the environment, about social impact.
So there's hope. That's good to hear. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I gotta say, this has been one of the more, intense conversations we've had.
There's a lot to process.
It is. We've gone from robot financing to, the meaning of life, practically. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that, the future isn't set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the choices that we're making.
Exactly. And the more informed we are, the better choices we can make. That's why these conversations are so important.
For sure. So thank you, as always, for lending your expertise to this. It's been enlightening, if a little overwhelming.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
And to everyone listening, keep asking the tough questions and stay curious because this whole post-human labor thing is only going to get more complex from here. We'll see you next time.